There's no reason to wait any longer to start enjoying the Del Webb lifestyle. Now through November 30th, choose from a wide selection of quick move-in homes at Sun City Festival and save up to $60,000. Or purchase a to-be-built home and get up to $20,000 to use toward design options that fit your style and budget. Because there's no better time to live the way you want to live. Visit Sun City Festival for details. Valid on select homes that are purchased by November 30th. Subject to change or withdrawal at any time without notice. Equal housing opportunity.
When it's time for an adventure on the open highway, one quick call to American Family Insurance gets you headed in the right direction. Our travel peace of mind package is there if you encounter a bump in the road. From roadside assistance to rental car coverage, we have you covered. Find a local agent or get a quote at amfam.com.
American Family Insurance.
American Family Mutual Insurance Company, SI, and its operating company, 6000 American Parkway, Madison, Wisconsin.
Hello and welcome to the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast for today. Remember the 5th of November, 2022. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. Since it's been an awfully long time since I put out episode 119 with Alex Craner, which was right after the Nord Stream 2 pipeline bombing. So it's been a while. I apologize for that. I've actually had a whole bunch of guests that lined up, and then we all just kind of missed each other like ships, sailing past each other in the night, and it just didn't work out. So this morning, though, this is great because we're gonna get back on the horse. Let's do it right. I have my good friend and frequent guest on the podcast, Alistair Crooke, owner of Conflict Forum and contributor over Strategic Culture Foundation. And Alistair and I are going to have a hopefully, as always, I know not hopefully, but as always, a ridiculously informative and fun chat about the changes that are happening civilizationally. As a function of the conflicts that we're seeing around the world today. So, Alastair, good morning. Good afternoon to you. And welcome.
Good morning to you. Very nice to be on your podcast.
The pleasure is all mine, sir. Truly, from the moment, the first time I got an email from you when I was first starting out, it was really edifying to help. Because early on, I really did feel like I was, frankly, farting into the wind. And then to have men like yourself, and David Stockman, and a few others poke me and tell me, no, you're doing good work, really helped. And so here we are today, 5 years later, and things are now accelerating around this nexus of people, not just myself, but others and yourself and others, which is a good sign. We're really beginning to have an effect on the zeitgeist, even if we're not right about everything. We don't have to be. We have to do is open up the conversation and the dialogue. So I really, haven't had a chance to say that to you publicly, and I'm happy to do so now. So this morning, now that all the Mutual Appreciation Society stuff is out of the way, this morning I want to before we started recording, we weren't sure what we were going to talk about, and talking about what you wrote in your latest piece. Strategic Culture Foundation about dysfunctionality and the use of it in common parlance now, kind of almost the weaponization. And I want you to go into grave detail as to what you're seeing there, and we'll just take the conversation. How that?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that one can distinguish really two types of dysfunctionality that are very obvious at the moment, and one is. And I just mentioned to you that in 2008, we saw the beginning of this new sort of era unfold when I don't know how many, but all of the leading sort of oligarchs, the financial big money men were put together in a room, locked in and said, find a solution to the financial crisis before we let you out. And they didn't. They didn't find a solution, but they were still let out. And their solution was simply to shove everything on the public balance sheet and to throw money at things. And we live in this era. And it's very important because this was a big transformation. This is the era where you don't govern, you don't resolve issues, you throw money at things. and you do it through thought processes and language, using the right sort of language, almost, to say it is enough to actuate it. You don't follow up with these things, you just think a reality. Going back to those old ideas, you sort of think an identity, and so you have thought codes and speech codes that sort of are then reinforced with free money coming in. And we've been limiting that sort of process. And I just wanted to emphasize one thing was, first of all, why it's so important is because, first of all, if you even go back to that, people say, oh, well, these are the clever people. These are the billionaires. They know everything. Put them in a room and they can resolve all these big problems. The answer is they can't. I mean, look at them. I mean, Zuckerberg and all of these people and Gates. I mean, these are not people that can deal with sophisticated diplomacy as you need today with Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. These people have no concept of no intellect and no training and no, most important, no history, experience of, they're all people who on the chessboard make one move. One move and then, what? They've been, it isn't checkmate? Oh my God, what's happened? It's not checkmate. They haven't thought 3 and 4 moves. When I used to do hostage negotiation, a lot, and people would come, governments would come, and they'd ask me, still do occasionally, not so much, thank goodness. But they used to come and they'd say, look, can you open a channel of communications? There's this problem or something. And I'd say, opening a channel is nothing. It's not the problem. Of course, opening a channel, I can do it. What are you going to say when the channel is open? What are you going to say? And what are you going to say when they respond? Have you thought what you're going to say beyond that? And most importantly, do you have a mandate to say this? Because I don't even want to hear about it unless you have a mandate, unless you have something to say. And this is where we are. We have these oligarchs who say they know where they want to go, and they have language, and they have thought coding and things like this, but they don't do a move beyond that. And then, so we have all those oligarchs who don't have any real diplomatic experience. But what you have under them is you have a whole, if you like, the permanent state, the technological managerial class, the professional class that hold their lesser brethren, the middle class and the people below them, in contempt. They scorn them. These are just, the jackasses. They don't bother. They're on the magic carpet. Their career is sort of put out. But, and I think I've heard you say it too, the problem is that these people are simply, chosen because they're compliant. They're chosen specifically because they're compliant. They've gone through university, tick the right boxes, and they're going to be there, and they're going to be compliant. Now, the question is, do the top level really understand the intricacies and the problems of managing such a complex system that there is in terms of, having a shadow government, a shadow economy, and a visible government and a visible administration, and all the incentives and the disincentives that have to be used and employed to keep the whole thing working? And the answer is they don't. And you don't have that. And you have, therefore, enormous dysfunctionality coming into the whole system because of another reason, which is just as important, is because this whole top level with its, with its language, its coding, thought codes and things like this, is propaganda. Well, these people, how do you interpret? If you're told, oh, the American economy is strong, there's no problem, inflation will be dealt with, Russia is on its knees, Putin is ill, the thing is going to turn over, China is, really stoking up problems for itself. Well, okay, but you're going to make the wrong decisions, inevitably, because you've got the wrong information. You're trying to run governance on the basis of information that makes no sense. And so even if you got a sensible decision at the oligarchic, at the inner elite level, how it has to trickle down through this whole process in Brussels and elsewhere. And these people are not bright. I mean, they're excluded if they're bright. I mean, they want people that will just do this, and they don't really have a great deal of sort of ability. So the whole thing sort of disappears, the half-life of a thought by the oligarchic class trying to sort of correct the problems we have in the world today is about 10 minutes before it gets down to the professional, class, the bureaucratic class in Brussels. I mean, oh my God, having, spent 9 years in Brussels working in the EU, I mean, it is a really dead structure. So that is one sort of dysfunctionality, which means that can governance work? Well, no, it means that governance does not work. And the second part of this is increasingly, and you sort of used the word beforehand, used weaponized dysfunctionality. Weaponized dysfunctionality to, if you like, cajole, to force people into compliance. I mean, we see this all the time in the EU. Just to take one of the biggest examples, we have, as you know, an energy crisis. Who doesn't? I mean, catastrophic crisis. But the elites, secretly are smiling behind their hands and saying, oh, this is great because now, this dysfunctionality will push everyone. They'll have no choice. We're going to go green. We're going to have windmills and we're going to have all of this structures, and we're going to have, carbon pricing and so on. And so you have deliberate areas of dysfunctionality. It's being created. I mean, the pandemic was the lead into all of this. The dysfunctionality about what you could do, what you couldn't do, what could be open, what can't be open, was a deliberate sort of process of creating, if you like, an asset, a structural asset to change society in they want, without the consent of the population and against the wishes of the population in order to achieve their ends. Another example is the EU has stopped, has said to airlines, just use 60% of your slots. That's fine. The other 40 you'll keep. We're not going to take them away from you from non-use. So just use the 60% and we won't, we'll keep them open. These are assets. These are valuable assets, these airport slots. So, if you look anywhere in Europe, there is complete chaos at all our airports. Heathrow, everywhere, Amsterdam, it's the same, all the same. Dysfunctionality. Why? To stop people flying so much, to stop the carbon print. All of these sort of processes.
And just to stop you there for a second, just remember that their goal is technocratic, kind of technocratically controlled serfdom. If we do not have the ability to move around, then we are tied to our land. This is the classic definition of serfdom as opposed to slavery. So the workers are tied to the land as opposed to being tied to somebody else owning them. And this is very clear, I think, in their war on food, their war on energy, their war on communications, their war on education. Like these are all being, all these things are being destroyed as a functional process, meaning introduced dysfunctionality on purpose. When I like to use the word vandal, in order to move the ball forward because they have an agenda. I just published an article yesterday about using the Hegelian dialectic, or what I like to call the Straussian two-step, in order to get us now towards oil and gas nationalization all across the West.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing, and once they've got that, then they've got communications and transportation nationalization, because it all just flows downhill from energy nationalization. So no, you're absolutely correct about this.
And and so the point is that who's doing governance anymore? I mean, everyone is doing weaponized dysfunctional governance. in order to cajole and coerce people into a certain political process. And so, this is why I think, there is this huge danger ahead, because, maybe the Fed and maybe Paul and people backing him are trying to move the West, Europe as much as America, off its, addiction to opium of easy zero rate credit, and to say, you've got to come off this addiction. And everyone is crying like mad and saying, oh, no, please give me, I need it. I need my fix today and as soon as possible. And more than that, because they've got so many of these dysfunctional projects going, all of them depend entirely, all are completely dependent on the fix of easy credit and easy money. Whether it is the energy crisis, whether it is, the transition, all of these things in Europe, all of them require, the spigots to be opened and the central banks to be splurging money. And if you have someone, the small group at the top, who see that, the West cannot go on with us, that this is, the extreme dysfunctionality. This is the meta dysfunctionality where everyone has become an addict to free money and free credit and no costs involved with it. Not only does governance go, we've had this for years. We used to call it Merkelism in the European Union, which is, you kick everything down, kick the can down the road, and then you throw a bit of money at it, and nothing gets resolved. And we paper it over with easy decisions and easy decisions and easy decisions. And this is the opposite of governance. And this is where, we've got this major problem of, no governance taking place. And this is what does worry. Supposing, the Fed is trying against the odds to pull the whole thing back towards a sort of rational system whereby, we move to something where resources are allocated according to some real signals, real economic signals, some real pricing signals, and things like that. Can it work? Or has the dysfunctionality become so great in the trickle-down part of the system that it's never really actually going to work? Because everyone is still, mentally, all of Brussels and everyone is just mentally sort of attuned to this weaponized dysfunctionality, because this is what, this is how we now govern, is by dysfunctionality, not making the American or the European economies work anymore. So that is the sort of thing that really does worry me. And the other thing that I think connected to it, but slightly separate, is that, I ask people sometimes, and I ask friends, Americans, say, well, if the midterms come and go, whatever the result, will there be a sort of change in mental attitude and a change in policy and things like this? Nearly always people say, well, maybe, but, some of the people coming in will still be, pro-Ukrainian or anti-Iranian, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we come in with all of that. And I'm saying, but you don't understand. You think it's all politics. It isn't. We actually have these long-term cycles, all of them coming to a point of culmination synchronistically. So we have the long geopolitical, certainly from the Second World War onwards, but even I would put it back to the French Revolution, this sort of nihilistic idea of politics. We have all of these, and that nihilism of the French Revolution, has taken its form in terms of population control and all these other aspects that we've transhuman, identity politics was the French Revolution. We've taken this all this way forward. And then we have all these other ones. We have, the financialized, the hyper-financialized economy coming to a culmination point. We have also this thing about commodities and fuel versus fiat coming to a culmination. We have the dollar hegemony. All of these things coming to culmination at the same moment. And my sense is that, there was an expression, I think it was the Prime Minister Eden at one time, when someone said to him, what worries you most now in the difficult political situation? And he turned around and he said in his very British way, events, dear boy, events. And that's what's right. And this is the point. It doesn't matter, what all those people are thinking they're going to do when they get into the House or into the Senate, in January, because events, it's these cycles. And these cycles are physical, structural. They're not political. Yes, there's politics at a certain level underlying them, but these are structural cycles that are going to all come together and hit us at the same time. And whether people have thought about it or have a different policy, it won't matter, because the events are going to take place and we'll have to think about them. So that's the sort of dysfunctionality that I see.
I see this exact same thing, and I'm glad you put it in those terms. And I've been, this is why I don't just look at markets, and I also watch the culture, because as Andrew Breitbart, so elegantly put it, that, politics is downstream of culture. And it's downstream of it's not just downstream of culture, which is of course then downstream of the psychological and, zeitgeist of the population, right? So whatever we're feeling then gets transmitted into the art, which then expresses itself, and then eventually it shows up in political cycles. And of course, now whether the financial stuff is driving this anxiety, or whether the cart's before the horse, or the chicken's coming before the egg or not, that's always up for discussion. I happen to believe that a corrupt money begets a corrupt society, and it's just of the cycle of history. But then,
and the sort of, just because I've heard you once say it, but I think it's very important to say, because ultimately what we're talking about is not just nihilism, but a sociopathetic. It's a pathological society that has been created dysfunctional, with these aspects of a real pathology that is underlying, a real person.
And when you have it's one thing when you have leaders who are, we talk about the oligarchs. You were talking about that, the oligarchic level of if they were to make good decisions and then try and even transmit good decisions, which they're not making. But even if they had a good plan and they try to transmit it through the bureaucracy of midwits that they've created, that has a 10% probability of success. But let's now talk about what happens when they have ruinous ideas at the top, and those actually have a higher probability of success, because they put psychopaths in charge of the permanent bureaucracy, and they're psychopaths themselves. We live in this meaning crisis that we've all identified at certain levels, depending on what aspect of the political and psychological commentariat that you speak. I'm thinking about people like Brett Weinstein and Gordon Peterson and even John Pageau and all of these people. And they're talking about the meaning crisis that we've been living through for the last 300 years in the West. Like, that's shown itself now in politics, and it exists at the top. It exists at the oligarch level, in a way that I don't think we've ever really grokked about how deeply flawed these people are. They don't see any limitations on their behavior, because they just see the rest of the world as, the rest of us is just, they're just ants. They're just the help. I mean, at best, the help. And and at worst, they're just people, when we don't need them, they're useless. They see them no differently than the average person. They're just prey. They're just or livestock, right? That's once you get into that mindset, once you see yourself as being a godlike figure, well, then there's no restraint on your behavior, and then of course you've set up systems that reward psychopathology. This is something Hayek talked about in The Road to Serfdom back in the 40s.
Exactly, yeah.
And so it just filters up to this, and this is what the cycle is all about, right? And that's the cycles you talked about are all about. So we're at that moment of maximum psychopathology as a structural conceit expressing itself within the society. And that's just going to drive everybody to, and that's why I keep saying over and over again, the only way out of this is on the long guillotines and rope maker.
I think the other thing is that, of course, this combination, this lethal combination of sort of, language and thought codes and things that, as an end in itself, I mean, like we have at the moment, as an end in itself, I mean, it's actually produced geopolitical dysfunction. So if you take something like Ukraine now, and we've had all these extraordinary efforts, probably seemingly sort of linked to the UK and to those services. I mean, whether it's the Kerch Bridge or the Nord Stream, or whether it was the so-called dirty bomb, and even now with this sort of hyped-up suggestion that Iran was about to attack Saudi Arabia. I mean, all of these. I mean, we're not doing that sort of politics. We're doing a sort of extended game of chicken. This is not real politics. I mean, because, you'd have to stop. I mean, they're so pleased with themselves, that what they've done. God, did you see what we did to those pipelines? I mean, pretty good work, hey? Pretty nice. And no one says, but listen, what if those drones had worked at Sebastopol? What do you think would have happened then? I mean, did you work that out? Did you have I mean, it seems, they don't even observe sort of telephone security. They're so, they're so dysfunctional at the moment. I mean, you hope a prime minister would sort of have some briefing and training on what to say and where you can say, how to use telephones, things like that, basic things. But so we're in this sort of, we're not actually, because, really, in the same way, if we extend our metaphor about money and sort of how politics has become a sort of opioid sort of dependency on cheap money and plenty of it. So, I mean, Ukraine has become sort of a complete dependency on the United States for weapons, for advice, for money, for everything to just sort of keep it going. I mean, it doesn't function at all. We have another dysfunctional state. And so the only way you can sort of take this forward is by this hugely dangerous game of sort of, creating all these chicken events around, blowing it all up and seeing what Putin does. Fortunately, Putin is taking this. He seems supremely confident and seems very, very in himself about all these things, and hasn't got, I don't detect any sign that he's, fast. He's quite, he knows what's what, and he knows where things are, and he'll just wait a little bit. And due course, I mean, all the signs are we're waiting for a big development that'll take a little time. People keep saying, well, can't we have a negotiation at the G20? I say, I'd be very surprised if there was a negotiation at the G20. It's not. I mean, it's not going to happen for all sorts of reasons. But, I mean, not least is that isn't the battlefield. The battlefield are the new missiles going into Poland and Romania, in the Finland saying, oh, we're open to having nukes stationed in Finland. I mean, that is, going back to that document of the 1st of December. That's the battlefield that, Putin is thinking about, not just, I mean, sure, Odessa, Nikolaev and all of that, but it's a bigger battlefield. But he knows at the moment, the forces, they've lost their communications, their lines of communication. They've suffered enormous attrition of their men, and the weapons are not arriving in the numbers. There aren't weapons to arrive from Europe and from America. The money is going to get much more difficult very shortly indeed. And so the whole thing is now just a complete dependency, which is on the lap of, the White House. Here's your, this thing that you've created is completely dependent. I mean, it's, your addict is here. what are you going to do? Are you going to go on feeding it, or are you going to send him to rehab? And
to clarify for the audience, so we know what we're talking about, just to go back to your reference to the December 1st document, is the one that the Russians sent last year as a framework for a new, basically strategic arms agreement between, these are Russia's red lines. Here's a treaty outline of our demands. Let's get this done. And we violated every one of those in the lead up to their preemptive strike on Ukraine. Because I say that as I'm at this point where I can't even call it an invasion. I did for a while just to be fair about it, but it's truly just a preemptive strike because the Ukrainians were going to strike the Donbass. They were asking to do so, and Putin just went first. Like he said, "Oh no, you think you're black? Or whatever it is."
No, he didn't actually just go first. What happened was, because I believe this is correct and comes from highly credible sources. Just days before the 24th, they had a source that provided them with the full details of the planned escalation that was going to take place against Donetsk and Luhansk cities, against the civilian population. They had all of the details provided. They had got them one means or another, and they had the whole thing, and it seemed there was no alternative. They just, at that point, said, okay, we got to go. This is it. We're not going to have...
We may not be ready for it. This may not be the right thing.
It's not...
And I'll be honest, it makes so much sense given the way they prosecuted and the way they did it. A lot of this makes sense then, from a purely von Clausewitz point of view, is how Russia and Putin have prosecuted this war been the right from a Clausewitzian point of view. My partner and I, Dexter White, talked about this while this was happening. And no, clearly not. But from a, pure, I don't have any other moves. These are my options. So, and since then, it's been nothing more than every attempt by Putin to turn this into an economic war. I think we clearly see from the UK, led by the UK, I think much more so than the Americans.
Like in Syria.
They're the ones that are in the crosshairs to be wiped out. They know they don't have control of the Federal Reserve. Charles is now going to spend every dollar that the House of Windsor has in order to try and stop the Fed from bankrupting Europe. He's already made this abundantly clear. They just had a coup against, against Truss. Led by Charles. Let's not kid ourselves. So when you back up for a second, it's just okay, that's the situation in the UK. So it's clear that every attempt by the British clearly have the most motive, means, and opportunity to have led these attacks on Russian infrastructure from behind, because they need the escalation to bring the Americans on board. We've done nothing new. This is the same over again. So, that's not conspiracy. That's just analyzing the people of the players on the floor. And Putin understood. This is why he, kept calling out the Anglo-Saxons as opposed to the Americans. So, when I look at this, I said it's very clear that what the Brits are doing with all these provocations is to take away Putin's non-military options, just like the way they took away all of his non-military options before February 24th, which forced his hand to go in militarily. Now we're just doing the same thing again here as we move towards the end of 2022. And the jury is out, I will be honest, as to whether or not the Russians have the military, capability to do what they need to do to end this conflict. I don't think they do. And that's what actually scares me more than anything else. And I say that having full respect for what they've actually accomplished. I can see the Russian military, given the constraints that Putin placed on them, and given the lack of preparedness, and given all of those things, they've actually worked miracles against a Ukrainian armed forces that was built over 8 years and led by American and British intelligence and machinery and weapons and all of it. And okay, but is it going to be enough? That's a good question.
I'd like to go back to your point about was it Clausewitzian, because I think that the definition of Clausewitz has become too narrow. It's been, politics and military sort of interchanging and working sort of in combination. But this isn't what Putin was doing, because he was playing other games of chess at the same time. I mean, so when he was managing the conflict, first of all, I mean, he came in with precisely the model of Syria, the operation where there was very limited forces in Syria, never more than 5,000 troops and 35 planes or something like that, fighters. And he was in support of the army, the Syrian Arab army there. And they were never at the sharp end because they had Hezbollah and the IRGC helping the Syrian army at the sharp end as well. And so he adopted that. And so we had that. Donbass and Luhansk militia were at the forefront. And he had the Chechens and he had Wagner Group, sort of the equivalent. And what was this for? The same reason he did it in Syria. Sure enough, Erdogan comes up and he says, okay, let's have a peace deal. And it ended up as Astana. And although Astana was not any great shape, it still is a process. It exists, and Turkey and the process very slowly is moving in a good direction, I think, at the moment. Now, he tried to do this, I think, actually in Ukraine, again with the idea that Turkey would come up and say, and that's what happened. Bingo, the same thing. Istanbul agreement, and Bojo said no. Boris Johnson, that is Prime Minister, said no way. And at the same time, he was deeply involved with trying to keep China on board, recalibrating how they looked at the process. That this was not a process of annexation, but this was a process of self-determination of these people. Meant a lot to India and to China to see it in that way. And it put it in the right format with the UN, because the UN Charter precisely allows for self-determination of a people, providing it's done. And that's why he keeps going on about what happened in Serbia and with Belgrade and so on, because there was a faked, the West, the European Union had the ECJ sort of say, yes, this is justified. So now they've got to live with it, in a sense. So I think that the Clausewitz thing has to be sort of widened to include the 5-dimensional chess playing, keeping, because both China and Russia need strategic depth. They need that Euro process to go ahead. And he's now come up with a vision, a vision which I don't think many people have read. I'm not including you in this, but I mean, other people don't read much his Valdai speech. But it was a very important idea about a polyvalent, differentiated civilizations cooperating in a trading group. It's not globalization because it's differentiated according to values. And saying we go back to those old values. China, Taoism and Confucianism and so on. Why? For the same reason he's done it in Russia, because actually, if you go back to those and you start taking models and you start to imitate this, then you get the energy. I mean, this is what was the energy of the Renaissance in Florence and things. They were all imitating, the Plato and the Academy in Florence in the 15th century, and getting huge. I mean, it was such a time of great energy and cultural excitement. And in a sense, the sort of revival of orthodoxy has given back energy. It's not institutional. It doesn't have to be institutional. It has to be about energy, just as one might have seen, for example, in the sort of support for Qasem Soleimani at the sort of those random.
Or even, dare I say, to be vulgar about it, the energy surrounding Donald Trump.
These people.
Previous to him, and the groundwork laid by Ron Paul. The same thing, that you saw around Nigel Farage and Brexit. The same energy you see around Viktor Orban in Hungary.
So it's I did a piece which will be up probably next week on the site, and about this. There's a lot more into this that people perhaps have not. I take it back to what happened when first. I won't bother this on the thing, but when the Hermetic text was first discovered and excited all of Europe because now we can avoid the war, the Protestant Catholic war. And of course it never worked. And I try and sort of draw the parallel with that about how, image and polyvalency and the sense that, everything were different facets of the one, and that this therefore meant that you respected China, you respected, Russia, you respected Iran, because these were all simply other facets of what you were. It's a different facet, a different way of thinking. I don't think any of us will have any traction in the West at all, probably, just as it didn't in the 16th century at all. But for people in the global South, people in the Middle East, it is very, I know people are very excited with this sort of vision, because it seems to give back a sort of directionality and a meaning to life. It's not, gets away from this nihil.
It gives people dignity in a way that the neo-colonial attitudes of emanating out of Europe rob everybody of. They rob everybody of their, not only their agency, but it's really just their dignity. And I think that we're just, I think we're all fed up. At just a foundational level, and I can tell you what I know I'm going to see here in the midterms here in the United States. We were talking with some people about this yesterday, and I said, we were talking about, well, can they cheat here, or can they do this, or whatever. I'm like chatting about this talking point video that the DNC put out to give to soccer moms and 20-year-old coming home for Thanksgiving to scold their MAGA uncles with about how the GOP is not going to change anything and they're not going to fight inflation. So it was like a list of talking points. And I said, what's really funny about this is, I can only watch a minute of it before I started, throwing up a little in my mouth. But what's really funny about that is it's clear to me that they don't even understand the parameter of the problem.
Yeah.
The people that they're speaking to here, they're trying to win all of these like technocratic terms and trying to win all these idiotic political arguments, when the reality is that the reason they're losing the quote unquote soccer mom vote and even the young female vote is that of the war on women through the trans thing and the grooming of children and everything else. I'm like, they have no idea. They had not walked into a county GOP meeting to see women who would normally have shown up, who would never have been political in their lives, are all of a sudden talking about taking over the school board. Like there's a foundational, they are just outraged as to what these people are, these crazy oligarchs and their midwit lieutenants are pushing on everybody. And they're like, no, we're not going there. So they have no idea what's coming, or at least they think they can paper it over. Again, like everything else, because of cheap money, because of cheap access to credit. If they just flood the zone by shouting at people over and over again, they think they can create the big lie, Yuri Bezmenov style propaganda and gaslight everybody into believing something that's not true. And I just don't see that happening. And I think that you're touching on something that's very important in this, it's happening here in the West, in we're seeing it politically, but it's already happened in the global South. 8 months that this war has gone on has proven to everybody that everybody outside of the West has not isolated Putin. Everybody outside the G7, for all intents and purposes, like, yeah, whatever. Putin's right in this, and we don't really care what you have to say. And when I see this playing out, it is a foundational statement of humanity. Say, we are not doing this. And I don't care how much you try to browbeat us and how much you try and whip us. It's not going to work.
I think it's very important, and I've tried to touch on this before, in that, what you're talking about is people at the sort of deepest level of them sense this is wrong, to treat children like this and to, this, all of these sort of gender processes that have come. And in many ways, it was reflected in Shakespeare's works when he talked about people going to the processor, sort of the Roman king, about to go and rape Lucretia. And he said, oh my God, as he walked down the corridor, he said, I know what I'm going to do is going to bring heaven and earth down on my head and will destroy my soul and will destroy her soul. And yet he does it, and that's exactly what happens. He collapses and he goes. But these aren't rules that have been, these are not things that have been set out by a parliament or by some committee. These are things that are deep inside our unconscious, the sort of memories of old narratives and the ideas that, there are some limits to behavior that you only cross, and by crossing them, you lose everything. You bring heaven and earth down in your head in Shakespeare's language, or you just bring disaster on yourself. It is the fate of this. And I think these things do lie deep in human sort of consciousness and are now sort of slowly sort of percolating up a little bit, these values, not in a sort of institutional way or in a particular ideological way. These are the sort of deep sort of memories people have that derive from old narratives, old values and things that they just know this is not right. And they couldn't probably articulate it to you, and it's nothing to do with what they've read in the Bible or this or anything. It's something much deeper. It's in the ether. It's all in the invisible world around us.
What's funny is that the stories that we tell ourselves, right? The Bible, I don't care the stories we tell ourselves is Shakespeare, the Bible, Star Wars, whatever. They're all a reflection of the stories we tell ourselves. They're just a way of codifying our human experience, which frankly, I believe real, like frankly, call me crazy, call me lunatic. I don't care. I think that, these our past experiences change who we are, and that these things are passed down from generation to generation, and only makes sense from a survival perspective. You can make an evolutionary.
But we actually know that. I mean, they are contained in our neurons and in the way. So, and the body remembers, even a few generations past.
Who is it that popularized the term the disgust circuit? I think it was maybe even Jonathan Haidt. I can't remember where I first came across that. I wrote a big article about it relative to Brett Kavanaugh a few years ago, the Kavanaugh and the limits of the disgust circuit. People just understand that these things are wrong. It creates a visceral response that they cannot name. It is, it's the old wound in a sense, in Arthurian terms. It's like, no, this is wrong.
Yes.
No matter how many times you try and tell me that it's right, I'm going to look at you and say, no, it's wrong.
Exactly.
That's wrong. And we're not going to. And this is what we're seeing. And we're going to see this on Tuesday in the United States in a way that we haven't seen in a political sense in a long time. And I don't care whether the Democrats and the oligarchs and their permanent state steal 20 seats or steal 3 Senate seats or steal 3 governorships. None of that will matter. All that's going to do is ensure that everybody's disgust circuit becomes even more outraged, and then they open themselves up for, and at this point, because they've stepped out in their arrogance, have stepped out from behind the curtain and opened up the vomitorium and the orgy from Eyes Wide Shut to the world to see. Oh, you opened it up for all of us to join in? Well, guess what? No, now it's just going to be wholesale badness. Let's just put it that way. And that's the only thing and that's the part that has always scared me. Frank Herbert talked about it with the Furman Jihad and Dune. It's the same thing. You repress people for too long. You take away their agency. You take away their humanity. They will get hard. They will get violent, and the body remembers.
Yeah. And also, and it's not surprising because, you take mothers and women who are mothers who, they have an instinct about children, about protecting children, about caring for children. And these things are not taught or sociologically imposed on them. They're deeply within the makeup of women as mothers, particularly. It's a sort of great sense of protecting their children, doing anything to protect their children. So, of course, you're seeing this. This is not, you can't call it populism or anything else. They are touching on these deeper strains, I believe, in society that are sort of emerging sort of instinctively. And I also agree that, as someone said to me the other day, and there are also these sort of negative downward pressures that we are coming from the sociopaths in our governance, in our societies. And I don't want to make this into a sort of Manichaean sort of struggle or anything like that, but it's true there are these sort of very different. We're at the point where there's a flux, convulsion of these two sort of things taking place. On the one hand, deeply instinctive things rising out of the deeper level of a human being, and at the same time, sociopaths who have this sort of great amoral determination to hurt and want to hurt people. And these things are clashing at this time, and that's why it's such a dangerous time, why it's such a sort of disturbing time for people.
No, I agree completely. The only thing I will take exception to what you just said is that you're giving these people too much credit and saying that they're sociopaths and not psychopaths.
Except
other things, psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made. So, I think these people are I think we've created a society that exploits pathology. And what a shock that the psychopaths got control of the levers of power, and then they, enabled and created a system that, like people's congregate, it doesn't, no shock to me. Like, why would you, but at the end, but also what's interesting about that is that once that system becomes so rapacious, and touching all the way back on what you talked about at the beginning of your opening remarks, right? You talked about the financial system being hyper financialized, and we're coming to the end of that. When that system starts to feed on itself because it can no longer feed on the rest of us, right? That's when they all start turning on each other.
Yes.
And that's the really dangerous point here. Yeah. And I really think that that's what's happening, I think, across the West. Why I can make the argument that it's, the psychopaths on Wall Street and Federal Reserve are like old European colonial powers, and they're fighting. And as ants, we should just try and get out of the way, try not to get stepped on, and realize that I think the psychopaths and old colonial psychopaths in Europe are worse than the ones on Wall Street. And then we'll fight them after they've beaten those guys. Then we'll fight them, and then we'll deal with that. And the rest of the global South has already identified all this, and they've all said, you know what, we're out. And all we're going to try and do is survive this fight as best as we can. And I think Putin has shown great temperance in understanding how to play this out. And again, I think your analogy about how he's played Syria, I think it's something I hadn't thought of. And the minute you said it, I'm like, oh my God, of course you're completely right about that.
I think the very interesting thing about Europe at the moment is, because we can see it so clearly, is that once you take away, Europe as an ATM, you put your card in and you draw the money out, and, it's not giving you the money out, and it won't be giving you the money out in this next period, then suddenly all these old, long, delayed sort of animosities and hatreds and tensions and, they're just sort of percolating up to the surface of the European Union from all quarters at the moment. So I think one of the big trends we're going to see here is going to be, people talking about, is this globalization or not globalization we're going to have? Well, clearly not in the other part, in the other half in Eurasia, because this is differentiated society, deliberately differentiated, not intergovernmental structures, cooperative. but differentiate. And then in the West, but what I think we're going to see, particularly in Europe, is having this great cycle towards centralism in Brussels. I think that's going to go in reverse as all of these old, deeply buried sort of animosities and histories from the past is suddenly starting to sort of bubble up again. Because, you put in your card and you don't get any money out of this European system anymore. So, I think decentralization is another part of it. Not in the way, of course, I'm not talking about Washington here and the sort of the hegemony. I'm talking about Europe. Europe sort of as a sort of...
Clearly, the problem in Washington is that there are, and it's very clear to me, that there are factions who have defined hegemony in different ways, and some of them are allied with the vestiges of using old European powers, and then there's American exceptionalism, i.e. the neocons, who are just, I think, the useful idiots of these Davosian style European elites. And I think that then there's also just the natural American, what's the best word? The disagreeableness. The ones who all left Europe are still the ones that really run the centers of power here, and many of them are just they're here. They're European by extraction, but they're not European in thinking, right? And I think about myself in that. I think about myself in that respect, right? Being second generation Italian, and my visceral hatred at this point for Germans is so overwhelming that I can't hold it in, and I fight me, bro. I'm a racist against Germans at this point. I hate to say it, but I can't not when I look at the world around me and I say, no, we're not European anymore. We're Americans. My family came over here immediately, banned Italian at the table from the day they passed through Ellis Island. Like my both sides of my both sets of grandparents did this. You're Americans now. Become American and assimilate. And within literally, my dad did not know how to speak Italian. I love my dad for that. And it's the same thing because his parents were. Now he was the youngest. And I don't even think any of his siblings. I knew most of them. Only a couple of them died before I was born because he was the youngest of 11 and I'm the youngest of 4. So this is why I stretch back only 2 generations, even though my family's been here for over 100 years. So I get that sense. None of them spoke Italian. They all spoke like pidgin Italian. They don't know how to swear in Italian. You know what I mean? That was pretty much it. They all said Italian words properly. Like it's mozzarella in my house. It's not mozzarella. Like that's mozzarella. When I hear that, it's just offensive. It's like stop it. It's not. So that's it. I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just
I want to ask you a question. Take you back to the key thing that we're talking about, this battle that is unfolding in front of us. And, ultimately what it's about is this, we talked about addiction to free money, to low interest rates, money, but there is the separate, if you like, geopolitical addiction to predatory expansionism in the world. How does Putin and Xi cure the West of this absolute dependency and addiction to predatory expansionism after such a long period from the 19th century onwards in these different forms, taking the shape colonialism for the Europeans and things like this? How does he rid us of this other than by major catharsis? Is there a way of doing it?
I think that this is one of those things where I think it's clear that they have aces, they have cards that they haven't played yet. And most of them center around their stated gold reserves, I think. Because I think it all comes down to the money at the end of the day. It's down to destroying the leverage within the system. And then, in some ways, it's funny. The minute you start talking in these terms, like my brain is now like firing in like 14 different directions. So I'm going to try and rein this one in, right? And this will be difficult. But so one of the things that I've identified is very clear that that we as Americans are being pushed into a Hobson's choice between the red states being forced to secede away from a terminally corrupt Washington because the Democrats won't give up power, right? And then, but if the Democrats lose on Tuesday, then they're going to start pushing for, or at least by 2024, they're going to push for not wanting to be associated with these evil MAGA Republicans who are just fascists. Like that narrative is already here. So they want to break the United States as a 50-state compact. But again, if that happens, then what happens? Then the U.S. can no longer be used as the shock troops for European colonial impulses. So it's like this is a Chinese finger trap for these people, right? Okay, so in effect, it's one of these things. Well, if we can't have the United States that we want, then there won't be a United States. But then that just plays into Putin and Xi's hands, and at that point, they just turn around and go, you know what? Really, as Russians, we have 10,000 tons of gold. Really, as Chinese, we have 20,000 tons of gold. We're going to back our debt with a 5% redemption clause in Treasury gold, and we're going to issue our debt that way, issue all new debt that way. Capital will flow to them, and the West will collapse because there's no way out of that unless the West goes the same route. Because hard money, commodities, we've already proven now that you can't print steak, you can't print barrels of oil. Financialization of these markets and the control of their prices through speculation in the futures markets, that world is ending.
It's gone.
I don't think it's gone yet. Think of this, that Powell and the New York money center banks understand they've reached the limit of what that system can get them, given the current situation, given the level of debt saturation across the West, and given that their choice is give up everything that made America, or go back to neo-European feudalism under a single-tiered monetary system that eventually, rolls, everybody up into programmable digital money, which no one wants. No one wants. I read a great thing yesterday about everybody's worried about central bank digital currencies now because it's out in the zeitgeist. In no small part because of us and others around us. Warning everybody about it. But I saw a report in Nigeria put the digital naira into circulation a year ago, and the uptake rate is 1.2%. Still using dollars. They're still using. They'd rather use physical Nigerian dollars. Not to say that we're not going to move towards digital money. Of course, we are going to move towards digital money, but it's going to be on our terms, not there. And this is, I think, the fundamental disconnect between the world they want for us and the world we want. And that's where the clash is, which is they want a similar version. They want the world to look like the world we want, but they still want to retain ultimate control over the foundational aspects of it. Whereas we're looking at it going, no. So while I give Bitcoin maximalists, for example, a lot of grief for calling them religious fundamentalists and everything else, I think I understand why they are. Right? They want a better system. They want a decentralized commodity style, non-counterfeitable money that is based in quote unquote reality. And that need is so powerful that they're willing to exclude any other type of crypto as a potential solution. When the truth of the matter is that Bitcoin is just a metaphor, not necessarily the thing. Maybe it is the thing, but jury's still out until it actually has to compete against other things. Right now, it's competing against ephemeral, vapor, i.e.
There's an interesting thing that's taking place here in Europe, not that pronounced, but starting is because of inflation, people are preferring cash. Because, this is something, when you put your card in, you've got no sense of how much you're really spending and how much it's all adding up. You just tap the screen and it's paid for. And so now when prices are sort of soaring up everywhere, because people need to control their expenditure, they're preferring cash because at least, what's in your pocket's in your pocket. When it's gone, it's gone. So that's important. The other thing I was going to say is you really have to experience the euphoria in the Gulf states about commodities. It really is.
I'd love to, but I haven't yet.
Oh, well, there really is. That sort of sense. Saudi Arabia is and the UAE. They're pushing out new projects all the time because, they have commodities and the West doesn't. And And the Saudis are not coming back from that.
No,
They've got
that's very, very clear
Gulf,
that unless somebody kills MBS, and I don't even think that's going to happen.
But even that, I mean, it really is, it is changing in a way the West refuses to publish or to comment or to note. But they have got it. I mean, Posner's theory about, inside, outside money and commodities versus fiat money. And so you're absolutely right. And I just feel, first of all, then I really can't understand how Washington could, threaten Saudi Arabia. Who do they think is going to buy these treasuries now? I mean, the last pool of sort of real money that can buy U.S. debt has just said no, thank you.
Well, again, the White House working for Klaus Schwab and company. They actually want to destroy the U.S. Treasury market. The goal is to destroy the U.S. Treasury market, is to destroy the U.S. dollars, to destroy the U.S. political system, destroy the U.S. legal system, destroy the culture and everything else. It's to push those trends that we're seeing that are in motion, push them to their breaking point so that the whole thing collapses, because you have to freeze capital in Europe in order to keep it from when they crash the economy there. And this is why I keep saying I'm a strategic board game player, and I've been doing this most of my life, and I just not really a chess player, because I don't think in terms of two-player games. It's too limited. You just have to think in terms of, okay, well, you just think in terms of incentives. I'm like, if I'm the Fed and I'm the U.S. money center banks, and I've been tied to LIBOR for all these years, we go out of the political and fiscal insanity that's happening, deep state insanity that's happening in Congress. I have the opportunity to do that, and I can take these people to the woodshed, and maybe we should. I quoted this wrong for a while, and I was corrected about it yesterday, which is that the great story about the Vietnamese foreign minister years ago saying, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" He said, "Well, it's too early to tell." And I think the same thing you can be said about the American Revolution. The American Revolution hasn't ended. Fighting the British control over our banking system. Murray Rothbard 20 years ago, when he was saying, "Look, the history of banking in America is the history of America. There is no difference here. You have to look at it from the banking system's point of view, and then you'll see how events.
Exactly.
I think it's fascinating, and I think that's the thing that we have to to identify that and just say, look, that maps everybody's incentive structure. Play it out, and you asked about what I think Putin and Xi can do here. All they have to do is sit back and wait.
Exactly.
Out of a terminal conflict.
Exactly.
And take the slings and arrows and the opprobrium from their own people and from the West, and just say, look, we have a bigger fight here. And if it costs them a little bit, it costs them a little bit. And I think clearly willing to pay that price. I'm not so sure about Xi. I do believe that Xi is a doctrinaire Marxist, and I think that's his Achilles heel. Right? Because I think that the expression of old Chinese values, and interestingly enough, the rise of Christianity in China is something that he's prepared.
No, I think what you say is right about China. But I was going to say, even though that this thing, creating a sort of new trading currency is complicated things and it's taking time. But in other respects, I mean, things and the idea of that commodities are currency is really caught on. And, the Gulf states are sort of cock-a-hoop, and they're sitting at the top of the pile and saying, okay, we don't want your weapons. Thank you. We could do without them. I mean, they are saying that. And, that's a huge shock to Britain and to the US. What? You don't want our weapons? I mean, we've been sort of treating them like sort of, whatever we imagine sort of primitive people are. I mean, wouldn't you like some more beads for yourself? We'll trade you some beads for your oil. You can have some glass beads, and, we'll take it in that sort of good colonial way. And now they're saying, no thanks, no more. Anyway, your weapons work so well, but no thank you.
And all we have to do is sit down and chat with the Iranians and work out the terms, which is what MBS and the Iranians have been doing for nearly 2 years now.
And that's why we had the sudden scare of, is Iran sort of try to stop it? But I mean, look at the so-called Abraham Accords. I don't use that terminology much. I call it normalization with Israel. But I mean, look at that, because nearly every member of the Abraham Accords is now in direct contact with Iran and has diplomatic relations with Iran. It was conceived as an anti-Iranian project. And now, how can you have an anti-Iranian project where every single state is sort of having, chatting with the Iranians and doing business and deals and negotiating with Iran? I mean, it's changed. It's a big shift.
I looked at that. I saw that report the other day. Oh, we're 48 hours away from Iran attacking Saudi Arabia. That's the day that Benjamin Netanyahu comes back into power. Could you at least have waited 24 hours to, separate these two events, dear boy, in time? Wouldn't it be nice? Oh no. I think, and that to me, that kind of weird, discordant narrative control shows a level of this, not just dysfunction, but desperation.
Desperation.
That we've never seen before.
Yeah, I do think actually the UK has sort of really become, out of control at some levels. These aspects of it, because it didn't used to be, but it is out of control. I mean, maybe Syria was because the UK was always in there with the observatory, was the Human Rights Observatory, and with the white helmets and all of these ploys and more, many more. And but now, I mean, I just see it. Why are they? I mean, they just add. Every week they're doing a new one. But what for? Just to play chicken?
Just to try and get Putin to overreact so they can get their just war. And again, I think it comes down to what I've been saying everywhere, which is that since they don't have control over the Fed, they need a war and war spending in order to neutralize the Fed's hawkishness and Fed, just like with the CARES Act, force onto QE and zero bound rates. And I got news for everyone. Putin's just not going to give them the war that they want until it's on his terms. Now, the thing that I worry about is after the midterms. I think Putin wants to launch an offensive on Nikolaev and Odessa. I don't know that he has the capabilities of doing that. I'm going to leave that up to people who have greater military understanding than I do. I just can see that that's what you'd want to do, because it's very clear that there's also this. They want to bring in a pipeline into up through the Mediterranean into Odessa through the Black Sea. They want to bring one north-south across the western Black Sea into Odessa. And Kissinger's behind this thing. You don't end the conflict in Ukraine until Odessa falls to the Russians, because Odessa is the means by which this conflict can be spun up at a moment's notice. I don't know. You've obviously got the reasons for saying that, but when I look at how it was being operated in this period right through until we ended and we had these the mobilization and the recognition. During that period, I mean, like in Syria, Russia had ridiculously few troops in Syria, perhaps 80,000. I mean, but there's administration and everything in that process, there's border guards, and it was tiny, and they were relying so heavily on the militia and the Chechen and the Wagner group. I mean, really heavily. And this was just, this was the defect of the, taking the Syrian pattern and putting it down on Ukraine. And at the same time, then in August, many of the contracts came due. Russia now has a contract army, and many of them come to an end in August, and they're free to go way home or enlist for another year or so. And many of them decided to go home, but it was just the rotation period as well in August. And so there was a very great, and now they have,
I mean, you can just see this huge change. I mean, there's forces going in, there's clearly, fortifications being met. I see all of this nonsense about Kherson is about to fall. I mean, the evacuation and things that are taking place there is because they're frightened of the dam. There's still the possibility, just like the Brits use those, sea drones. You use those drones against the dam. We don't know. It probably would survive. But I've seen the Russian sort of graphics. They've done all these computer simulations. And a lot of that area, I mean, for 3 to 5 days would be sort of wiped out. And so they're being very careful. But I don't think that means, yes, they can look how carefully they've done this bombing and these drone attacks. They left all the power stations intact. They've just taken out the transmitters of it. They've reduced the ability of the command and control. They took out anyway Starlinks some time ago, which they had been able to do for a long time. And then they're now slowly sort of winding it down. And what I see is more or less, the Ukrainian forces are pretty well, they do these mini sort of offensives, but they're down to company sizes. I mean, very small numbers. They're not sort of thousands. They're maybe 100 or something like this. For the sake of it, for the West, optics. This is what it's about, optics. But otherwise, I don't see, I think when the ground gets hard in end of November, beginning of December, and he's not in a hurry. He's not going to do this before the midterms or anything like this. He'll just do it in its own time.
Be the greatest gift to Joe Biden he could give.
Yeah. So he'll just wait.
I know. I have two minds about whether that would be the right thing to do or not. Simply because at some point, I don't trust the GOP at all. I don't trust Cocaine Mitch and Kevin McCarthy and the rest of them. Now, the big question then is, do the people that I've identified as the ones driving monetary policy, i.e. the JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, have they, convinced enough people within the DOD, within the State Department, within, the GOP, oh, by the way, you're not going to get any money for re-election in 2024 unless you do what we said. This is the new policy. The new policy is reindustrialization of the United States and pulling back on the global reserve currency because it's killing us. We're doing all of this. And you're not going to give them the war in Ukraine that clearly everybody wants. I don't know that that's there. Okay, I don't. It could just as easily be that they want that as well. And so I don't trust the GOP coming in, the leadership that is. Depending on how many seats the Democrats lose and to whom they lose, will determine how big the caucus is in Congress and the Senate to, move away from John McCain, Victoria Nuland style foreign policy. So I don't know.
There are neither the weapons available in Europe or in America anymore that can, change the course of this conflict. Ukraine has lost so many men. I mean, particularly the sort of 30-year-old experienced people. And their communication system is not functioning in both because of the attrition on the electrical supply and elsewhere. I think that they're stalled at the moment. And I don't think even if, there's someone who wants to sort of gear it up, other than by these games of chicken, I don't think they're capable of doing a major offensive. I know all the language. I see, what the UK is saying. Oh, Putin is sick. The military is collapsing. Nonsense. It's not true. The Russians could do this. I'm not saying I don't know how far and what they want, but I do think I'd be very surprised if they don't sort of insist on having Nikolaev and Odessa. I mean, Odessa means so much to the Russians.
From the moment this thing started, I've been saying, I've been coast of the Black Sea.
Yeah,
and this is the only way to stop the shenanigans. It's also a way to make sure that you open up trade of Eastern Europe outside of the EU. And, because at that point, with a weak government in Bulgaria and the tributary system of the Danube River and the control over the port of Odessa, and then, obviously rebuilding the rail lines to Eastern European goods across southern Russia, which is currently Ukraine, back east and feed it into the north-south transport corridor. To me, it seems very obvious that Odessa east, and it could liberate all of Eastern Europe from the European Union. And this is what everybody is scared to death of. And to me, it's very obvious. The question that is still an open question, again, is whether or not Russia has the military prowess to get this done or not. And I'm not saying that they do or they don't. I've just heard credible arguments on both sides. They could or they couldn't. And so I'm just leaving it as an open question.
There's absolutely no need to do it because, we just have to wait and events will show what happens. I mean, there's no point sort of, doubling down on things that we finally don't know all the parts to it and all the background to it.
But the big question is, as you pointed out earlier, is, okay, if the Russians make that move, what are the secondary and tertiary moves from how's the West going to reply to this? This is where you start having to look at battlefield asymmetries, weapon asymmetries, and all the rest of it. And one of the things I've discussed with my partner Dexter White about this is that this something that is important in all the nuclear discussion. The U.S. has two types of tactical. Those are those are throw weight definitions. Tactical nukes and strategic nukes are of a particular throw weight.
Battlefield nukes
are not tactical nukes, but they are talked about in the West as if that's what the Russians would throw. The Russians will have sub-kiloton, as a nuclear weapon. They have 50-ton weapons. We got rid of them all because they're just ridiculous to hold on to because of the maintenance, and then they go subcritical so quickly, and the warheads have to be reconditioned and everything else. The Russians can throw that on the battlefield if they need to. Not have a proportional response other than escalating to AIDA. So whenever you're looking for how can the West respond if they can't put the troops in place, even though we have tripwire troops clearly meant to try and gin up outrage if the Russians kill them. Most Americans would be like, why are guys I like Ukraine, but I hate Russia, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my voice for this. In 2016, when Trump won all of the zip codes where the highest concentration of Iraq and Afghanistan deaths occurred, Justin Raimondo, before he died, did the analysis. I keep going back to that over and over again. They just don't want to admit this. They just think that they can shout people down and make things happen. I'm like, no, it doesn't work this way. I'm going to change that. The body remembers. I don't know. I don't know what they do at this point. I don't know what the Brits are thinking. Like, tactically, sure, take away Putin's economic weapons by getting rid of the Nord Stream 2. Great. Okay, now you leave him military options. He has a military asymmetry that you can't respond to. Now what?
Nord Stream was never his weapon. It was Angela Merkel's weapon. I mean, it was she who proposed it.
Keep the Poles in line.
Yeah, exactly. It was, to give them a position in Europe, which was unassailable. So it wasn't his position. He's quite happy. I don't think it's ever going to come back to Europe, Russian energy like that. Well, at least not for some time anyway. There'd have to be a big
If it does, it's going to come in through Italy.
Come in from Italy, probably through Turkey. And of course, everyone says, oh, well, the Europeans would never do it. Oh, nonsense. Of course, they're already doing it. They're taking LNG from China, which is just Russian LNG. They've taken refined products from India, which is just Russian. I mean, of course we'll do it. I mean, if it gets desperate, we'll do anything.
Of course. What's this, what is a drowning man going to do? What do you do? You don't jump in after a drowning.
I do think that, Putin is understanding. So, going back to Clausewitz, we have to filter in the economic, the timing of the economic. When is the time to sort of shift to a different playing game in the sort of dollar hegemony, the monetary hegemony process? We have to think about China, India, keeping China on board, India on board, the other states. I mean, it's not proving very difficult at the moment because they're all actually flocking to Russia. But all those things. And then, as I say, he'll sort of, he can't afford, there's the old song in English, the Grand Old Duke of York, he marched his troops to the top of the hill and he marched them down again. I mean, this was a satire on the Duke of York, of course. I mean, but you can't mobilize 300,000 men. You can't start a big campaign of attrition of the power supply system throughout Ukraine and then say, okay, we'll march it all down again and you can all go home. There's momentum to these things that, you march them up the hill, you can't march them down the next day. So I think all the feel that I get from the Russian side is that everyone's waiting for something big to occur at some point, but not in a hurry. They're slowly building, they're slowly reinforcing all of the points. More and more troops are coming. In Kherson and Zaporizhia provinces, you've got about 150,000 now, whereas before it was tiny. Big troop numbers are coming in. And even in Kharkov, up there, there's troops coming. It's all sort of slowly, and, Russians do it deliberately. So that's what we have to wait and watch.
Exactly. Oh, Alastair, this has been a lovely chat. I'm glad we had a chance to catch up.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm going to wrap it up for episode 120 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. I want to apologize here. Normally the audio quality should be better than this, but unfortunately I had a real hard time with Skype and didn't realize it. They must have pushed down another stupid update to Skype's compression algorithm because it was squelching me in such a way that I had almost unusable audio. And Alastair's signal was probably too hot on his end, and I don't know what was going on, but I had almost zero signal for my audio while recording this, and it just made the whole post-production process kind of laborious, and it tells me that, look, I'm just not going to use Skype anymore. That's it. I'm done. That's it, because it's not reliable. It's crazy. So, thank you for bearing with. If there's some weird edits and whatnot that feel odd, I had to do some overdubs here or there just to make sure that everybody understood the points I was trying to make because there was unusable audio. I did my best. So hopefully we won't have this problem again in the future. So, all right, there we are. Follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can follow my work at my blog at tomluongo.me. And of course you can sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter and private blog service over at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns. You guys be well. You take care. We'll be back soon. I got Matt Ehret on deck, so we're going to be doing that later in the week. You guys be well. Talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.
Drew and Jonathan Scott here to tell you that American Family Insurance wants to protect your dreams. So whether you're at home singing in the shower,
Every note,
or prefer singing your heart out in the car like Drew,
cruising.
you can save up to 23% when you bundle your home and auto insurance with American Family Insurance. Get a quote or find an agent at amfam.com. Insure carefully, dream fearlessly.
Visit amfam.com to learn how discounts may apply to you. American Family Mutual Insurance Company, SI, and its operating company, 6000 American Parkway, Madison, Wisconsin.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino online.
I was only playing for fun, so winning was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's favorite free online social casino. You, too, could have the chance to win life-changing cash prizes. Absolutely anybody could be like Mary. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and play for free now. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice of the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of the winner.